Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host, Dusty O'Connell, and joining me is who I assume to be Arif Hassan, but as far as I know, could easily be a machine learning imitation whose voice has been culled together from 5 years of podcasts and things he's written on Twitter that is actually operated by the Zone Coverage editor. How you doing, Arif/Zone Coverage staff?
I have no comment on the second. I'm doing great, Dusty. How are you?
That's good. So my significant other, his company does a company-wide cleanse where all the servers, bartenders, managers, cooks, chefs all join together for a week and do like some silly fad diet thing where they give up. They use a very fatty cleanse to kind of be their base, but they give up like alcohol and caffeine and like processed food and dairy for a week, like in solidarity to try and like, promote healthy habits, that sort of thing throughout the company. Like a supportive fool that I am joining in this cleanse. But
So I mean, like typically that's like you restrict yourself very severely for like in choice, not an amount. For what you said, a week, right? So what are you restricting yourself to?
Basically, unprocessed sugars and grains, as little gluten as possible, which I don't know about that.
Unprocessed, so you're just eating grass?
Well, no.
What's an unprocessed grain?
So like non-enriched flours.
Okay.
No white flour, no white sugar.
No vitamin A. Got it.
Yeah. No like partially hydrogenated oils. A focus on more natural foods. There's a couple of things that we
quote unquote
decided are dumb in the cleanse and will not do. For example, they recommend no fermented foods, which is one of the dumbest things I've ever heard. Like clearly a person who is not a nutritionist or a food anthropologist thought of that. So after making
Why would you like fermented foods, Dusty? I mean, it's got microbes in it. You're promoting bacterial growth. How could that be anything but bad for you?
No bacteria at all. So we made a pretty compelling case to the upper management, and we were able to get that stricken from the record. But the other thing that we pleaded to allow ourselves was 1 cup of coffee a day, like black coffee. Because the thought of a life without caffeine, like last night I was trying to kind of wean myself into this ridiculous process. And I was like, I don't know if I have a headache because, I haven't had a drink in a few days or because I haven't had caffeine in 2 days. And one of my coworkers was like, probably both. He's probably right.
That's why the cleanse, and it's going to free you from your addiction.
Well, or just severely shock my system, which is why I've been...
Right, free you from your... Is that not how addiction recovery works?
Well, I've been slowly weaning myself for the past 2 days off of the stuff that I think it'll be most difficult for me to separate from. But today is the start of my new dairy-free, red meat-free, mostly gluten-free life, and or week, I suppose. So we'll see if I survive to next week's episode.
All right.
Before we get into, I alluded to this in the intro, but you've had kind of a rough week on Twitter. Well, rough 36 hours, we'll say. But before we get into that, I wanted to thank Nick Sandbolt, who is a recurring donor and is now an even more recurring donor to the show, for his $5 Patreon contribution. Your sticker will be on its way. And we would like to encourage anyone else who listens to the show on the reg to throw us a few bucks a month. $3.50 is the minimum suggested donation, but for the $5 a month level or above, we'll send you a sticker. And you can show off your Norse code love on your laptop, the back of your vehicle, on your thermos. I have stickers on all three. Wherever else you feel it would be appropriate. to share that you are an enthusiast of the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings.
I don't think I have a sticker.
I definitely mailed you stickers.
Well, didn't get them.
Are we doing this again? Is this going to be the candy corn all over again?
It's the candy corn all over again.
USPS is notoriously unreliable. Well, I will rectify that as I send Nick's sticker out. I'll make sure that Arif has a handful of stickers to hand out. Maybe you can hand them out at football machine tapings. I think that would be funny.
That would be great. Yeah, absolutely.
I would enjoy that. So patreon.com/NorseCode if you'd like to become a recurring contributor. And we are officially now 2 weeks away from London. Yay!
Very exciting.
I'm so stoked for this. It's going to be exciting, and the game should be a good one. My expectation is a win, but we all know how winnable games go for the Vikings. And,
right.
We've got a handful of people who have already contacted us with recommendations and a desire to be in the room as we record our live-ish podcast after the game. If you cannot join us in London in person, then you certainly still have the opportunity to be there in spirit. You can buy us a beer or one of those little Union Jack flags on a stick, or whatever other memorabilia you feel appropriate, with a one-time donation to the show at paypal.me/NorseCode. And we will read off your names on the air and cheers you live from London for your ongoing support of the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. We've got a cool interview for the Ravens preview with Dylan Bishop, Ravens guy. I mean, he's not like part of the organization, but he knows a lot about them.
Why do your players suck?
I know, and that's basically the crux of the interview. Like, why you just go down the list and say, why is every major position player so bad, and what are your hopes for the future? But before we do that, so Carson Wentz, huh? Odds-on favorite to be MVP. This was the beginning of your ignominious descent from the great heights of Twitter.
Okay. So a couple things happened. The third thing actually is really minor, but because it happened on the same day, I'm counting it. So the first thing was something that I had tweeted out the night before while watching the Monday night game. It was another tight end shovel option, which we've seen an explosion of in the NFL as a past concept ever since KC debuted it on week 1. And so I tweeted out like, oh, it'd be nice if the Vikings could draft an athletic tight end to do that. Like, it's a joke, right? I mean, the Vikings drafted Michael Pruitt and Bucky Hodges the 5th and 6th rounds as athletic tight ends, and they cut them both. And so that was what the joke was about, is that the Vikings couldn't manage to find ways to either find usable athletic tight ends or find ways to use athletic tight ends that they've drafted recently for plays that seem purpose-built for those tight ends, right? It was like not a great joke, whatever. It's like one of the 80 jokes I make on a game day. Only one of them ever hits. But it was a joke about the Vikings' ability to find athletes in the draft recently, and specifically about how it would have been nice to have Bucky Hodges on the roster.
You foolishly did not account for fans' desire to not only misinterpret the joke, but go tattling to Kyle Rudolph about it.
Yeah, so they responded to the tweet with @KyleRudolph82. Geez. Like, yeah, okay. I didn't respond to that tweet, right? Because a couple of people were like, are you calling out Kyle Rudolph? And I was like, I'm obviously not. I clearly was not obvious. I communicated poorly because a lot of people thought I was. But more specifically, they thought I was because someone else called out Kyle Rudolph in my mentions. But a couple of people were like, are you calling out Kyle Rudolph? And I didn't respond to any of them because I was watching the game and tweeting. Very, very important stuff, right? But someone added Kyle Rudolph, and I kind of didn't think much of it. So the next morning, I see that Kyle Rudolph responded. I don't have the tweet in front of me. I guess I should for this bit, but he's like, yeah, the last couple of athletic tight ends they've drafted have gone real far, or something like that, right? Like something like I was surprisingly mean-spirited. And I thought it was like, I can't believe you would say that about your teammates. I thought he was taking it to Pruitt and Hodges. I was like, that is weird. Like that he just kind of burned him. So I screenshotted it and tweeted it out. And, my tweet was, A, don't at players. It's weird and lame. B, holy shit, Kyle Rudolph. Damn, he came in. And a bunch of people were like, oh, Arif got owned on Twitter. And
Arif takes the
L. I'm
L.
not even sure how I got owned, but everyone's acting like it. So clearly that's what happened.
People just see what they want to see. And clearly people don't know who Michael Pruitt or Bucky Hodges is. Although Michael Pruitt did get in on the action.
So this morning, Michael Pruitt tweeted it. He did. Okay, so he took a screenshot of my screenshot, first of all, which, come on, just download the image. Like, if you don't want to quote tweet me, that's fine. But just download the image. You don't got to screenshot the screenshot. And he's like, haters from all sides. And I was like, well, he definitely thinks Kyle Rudolph called him out. I didn't retweet that because I'm done with it already.
That's for them to sort out. You dug yourself a tiny hole, and then everybody else came in with the back, the front end loaders.
Yeah, I should have responded to that dude right away. And I was like, it's not about Kyle Rudolph. If I just done that, none of this would have happened.
But you tried to let it blow over, and clearly that is poor use of Twitter, because that's not how we do things here.
You're right. And so, Rudolph responds, and he's like, oh, it wasn't about you. All love to you, Peru. I just, people putting their opinions out there don't want to get checked or something like that. They don't want to get called out for putting their opinions out there, which is like, what are you talking about?
And that was what surprised me, was the dog pile on you for like, oh, Arif won't stand, but Arif doesn't have the courage of his Twitter convictions. Oh, he won't stand behind calling Kyle Rudolph all. And you're like, well, I never did.
Right,
that wasn't the point.
Yeah. So that's like the thing. And it's like, I'm not even sure what Kyle Rudolph was saying that's an own to me. Like, that's the thing that like bothers me the most, that everyone's like, Arif got owned. And I just don't know how. And this isn't like, what's the at drill tweet? I'm not owned. He said, sinking into the pile of corn. Like, I genuinely have no idea.
As Arif is swallowed by his own mentions.
Yeah, right. Like, and the thing is, like, and I kind of get it. Like, a player says something snarky to a football writer, and immediately that means the player is saying something about the football writer. But okay, so I guess he was, and he definitely thinks he thought so, because his response to Michael Pruitt was, I just gotta, call people out for their opinions. And I was like, I never called him unathletic. I was just like, oh man, remember Bucky Hodges? Like, that was the joke. It was like, remember Bucky Hodges? And what he said was like, those other athletic, he said, quote, athletic tight ends worked out so great, right? And it's like, I don't know how that's an own to me at all. Is it like the Vikings shouldn't draft athletic tight ends because you and David Morgan are balling out? Is that your argument? Like, I have no idea what you're saying. But that happened. My mentions just blew up for the rest of the day. People are like, I can't believe Arif would pick a fight with a player. And it's like, what are you, I didn't do any of this.
Well, and I think the final proof in the pudding, so to speak, is that Rudolph has since blocked the guy that added him and a couple other people who jumped in, and not you. A bunch
of other people who didn't even respond, people who just liked Kyle Rudolph's tweet. They liked Kyle Rudolph's tweet, and he blocked them. Which I think is just, I think he doesn't know how to mute a conversation or something. Like, I think he didn't want more notifications, so he blocked the people filling up his notifications, which I sympathize with. But I think he was trying to mute the conversation and didn't see that option or something. I have no idea why he kept blocking people. I'm not blocked. I have no idea why.
The whole thing strikes me as very confusing.
Right, so that was part one of the day.
Wait, so did I get my timeline wrong? Was the Carson Wentz leading MVP odds on Boveda like after that?
I don't remember the timeline. I remember magnitude mostly. So in order of magnitude, number one was this weird Kyle Rudolph thing that consumed most of my day because I couldn't log onto Twitter without having to like deal with the shit. I was like trying to I published like 3 things that day too, and I was like, no, just read my stuff. I don't care.
R.I.P. your
really
mentions.
Good. Adam Thielen's really good. Don't you want to read stuff about guys that everyone thinks are really good? No. People
would much rather make up their own popcorn drama.
You're right. I was like, So like yeah, it's an unusually productive day for me. I don't publish 3 things at once. Admittedly, one of them is this podcast, so it's not as if I did extra work that day for it. But still, it's just read the work or whatever. What's most surprising to me is that there was definitely a small spike in followers. Like, I'm not really sure why. Like, let's see what the sports writers say about getting owned. Follow. But the second thing was, like you mentioned it, Carson Wentz is currently leading Boveda in MVP odds.
Whereupon you write your own epitaph, which I found to be one of the greatest self-written epitaphs of all time.
Here lies Arif Hassan, 1988 to 2017. Wait, what it was? Arif dies a cynical, bitter, lonely man.
Because no one loves a cynical hater or something.
No one.
Survived by no one.
Because no one loves a loser who is wrong.
Yes. Oh, boy.
Which, like, I found this interesting, too, because I think it conveyed the wrong... I definitely had a communication error there, too. Because a bunch of Eagles fans followed my mentions and were like, oh, man, it's real nice of you to see you admitting that you were wrong on that. And I was like, well, it's not exactly what I was doing, but,
I think your tongue was firmly in cheek as you apply them. And it is only week 6.
Right, exactly. That's more like why I'm not willing to fully admit that I'm wrong yet. Clearly, I'm on the path to being wrong. There's no question about that. But it's... The epitaph was mostly like, this sucks. It was mostly like, I can't believe it. My brand, oh no. It wasn't like I was admitting I was wrong quite yet. Although, that is another thing I had to clear up. Like, I got accused of never admitting that I'm wrong. When it's like, you don't read my work or listen to my podcasts. I'm wrong friggin' all the time.
Frequently wrong.
Remember the Sam Bradford thing? Way wrong.
And you're also less confrontational about it than some people whom we know who also trade in sports.
Right, exactly. So, it's like weird that like people are like, Reef never admits when he's wrong. It's like, it's kind of a lot of what I do. But yeah.
Well, when you have that many takes, it's hard not to be
right.
like what do you? So what would you say is an appropriate success rate for like a strong to elite take haver? Like 70%? Like if
I was
you were
about
right,
to say like 67-70% would be where I think a strong to elite take haver is, especially when a lot of their takes have to do with the draft.
Oof, yeah,
like
those are some long shot takes. But again, if you just have a lot of them, then you struggle with not regressing to the mean. And so the line has to be above 50%. But there's no way that anyone can be like right 80 to 90% of the time. It's just not possible.
Yeah. That's whatever. So that's like another thing that like Carson Wentz is like leading the MVP race right now. It's kind of funny though, because like I was talking about this, I don't know, last week somewhere. I was like, oh yeah, someone called in to either wrote a thing into this show or called into the Football Machine and I was like, yeah, MVP Carson Wentz, huh? And I was like, he might actually be, because this is before the Boveda odds came out, and I was like, who are the MVP candidates? And I googled it and I took a look and I was like, well, Aaron Rodgers, well, he's injured, so that doesn't count anymore. Tom Brady, yeah, probably, except he's just not going to win it this year because he's competing against himself. He's not competing against any other quarterback. He's competing against himself. They're not going to give him an MVP award for being less good than he usually is, even if that's more good than everyone else. And then the third option was like Carson Wentz, and it's like, yeah, I guess it's him. And then the Boveda odds came out, and it's like, yeah, great. Which is like, okay, let me say this. If Carson Wentz is as good as his current statistics indicate, which, again, everyone knows I'm suspicious of that. At best, that's 6th. At worst, that's 10th. How is that an MVP? It's because the Philadelphia Eagles are undefeated. If that's entirely because of Carson Wentz, then yeah, MVP. But like clearly they've got a really, really good defense. I love that defense. But whatever, right? You're the quarterback of an undefeated team. You do really well. Fine, you're the MVP, I guess. But that's the thing. So the third thing was mostly just like people brought up the apropos, like independent of either of these things, people brought up like the me eating shit in coverage on Zach Bennett after the football machine. You know, that clip of me trying to cover a receiver.
Oh yeah, that I don't know why that I think was when it became a dog pile.
Yeah, it was just like, I was just like, come on. It was like independent, right? Because Yinka had a video where he threw a touchdown pass. So Yinka at Saxy Prince, who I've interacted with quite a bit on Twitter, is kind of fun. He's playing flag football. He throws a pass. It's successfully a touchdown, but it's also like an awful pass, right? Like objectively, the ball has no idea what it's doing, and it just ends up being a positive result. So that comes out, and like people are like, "Well, what's worse, Yinka's pass or Arif's coverage?" Which I don't even know why you ask that. Obviously, my coverage. Both resulted in touchdowns. The only difference was I was trying to stop one.
Oh boy!
Right. So people talked about that a lot. That was cool. And then someone else brought it up today, independent of that. Like I tweeted out there's this good screenshot of the Stanford offensive line blocking like a 20-lane highway for Bryce Love. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. And the guy who screenshotted it was like, yeah, the offensive line's really good. Anybody could get 20 yards. You could get 20 yards. And then someone else responded with, I don't know, we have video evidence otherwise. And we just, crap, man.
You just can't win for losing in this place.
Yeah, this is a rough in the Twitter streets last couple of days.
Well, and then was it like overnight or last night or something? It was revealed that you do not have 100% control of your Twitter account, or that you might have left it open on somebody's computer at Zone Coverage.
Well, no, so my Twitter account is connected to the publishing mechanism at Zone Coverage. So every so often, my editor, usually Brandon, there are other editors, but I think it's just Brandon who's done this, will fake publish a story so that it sends a tweet out from my account.
Oh yeah, we do a similar thing with the Norse Code account. Like we're I don't know if you are connected to it, but James and I are both connected to it, and through a quirk of TweetDeck, which is both the best and worst desktop Twitter client. James had access to my personal Twitter account, which he, to his credit, never abused, even though I just left it there for like 2 weeks. But to me, that casts significant doubt onto whether or not you are an actual person and not just a, like I said in the intro, a machine learning algorithm designed to generate hot takes and self-ownage and occasionally produce think pieces about the Minnesota Vikings.
I just want to go back to like the 3 years ago Twitter where I was owning people and not the other way around. What happened, man?
Okay, so
I lost my edge.
So this has been well. You also gained a check, so
it's true. Way worth it.
Through all of this, how many people have you blocked?
0. I've blocked 0 people.
There you have it. The magnanimous machine learning algorithm at Arif NFL. Speaking of unlikely things to have happen, NFC Offensive Player of the Week for the first time since 2012, running back Adrian Peterson.
Good Lord.
After, what did he have, 136 yards or something and a touchdown?
Yeah, 134,
touchdowns.
Something like that. Yeah,
134 and 2 touchdowns, yeah.
Yeah. Pretty good day. I that blew my mind.
His first weekly honor since week 14 of the 2012 season and his 8th overall. So after collecting a bunch right away, 5-year drought, and then number one again.
Week 15 of December 2015 was the last time he had a good game. So, like, not even NFC offensively, just the last time he had a good game. Jesus. Like, the last 20 games that he played for the Vikings, his, like, best average was 3.7. I want to say 3.67 yards per carry. And all of the other ones have been worse. So, cool. And then the Saints, he didn't do well. And then Arizona, obviously, the place that, like, has the fountain of youth for Larry Fitzgerald and hosted, like, the end of careers for a ton of running backs. Edge, I think Edgerrin James and Emmitt Smith. There's at least one more, but like, goodness. And Chris Johnson, obviously. Chris Johnson had a good year last year before they were like, what are we doing? Here you go, David Johnson.
Leave it to the old guys, apparently.
I don't think it'll sustain.
You don't think 5.2 yards a carry is something that Peterson can maintain?
I don't think 4.5 is something he'll maintain.
And that was his last best year, as you were saying. Or that's actually about like all except for 2014. That's like his entire career.
Yeah.
Well,
right.
He looks forward to proving you wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I can't wait to be wrong about that too. Although,
no, there's so who's going to be MVP? Is it going to be Adrian Peterson or Carson Wentz?
I know which is worse. It's Carson Wentz, but if it's Adrian, things still are not looking good for me.
Then it might be time to hang up the old Twitter cleats forever.
It's just like, what am I doing out here? Goodbye, Tate. Good night, man.
Oh boy. So Vikings held practice today with the great Teddy Bridgewater, which created a seizure app activity on Twitter. However, Mike Zimmer attempted to throw cold water as quickly as he could because he was just taking individual reps and he was on a pitch count, which I believe, like, is that a thing? Aren't they just like choosing to mix sports metaphors when it's convenient?
I've heard the word pitch count used with quarterbacks before, but I always feel weird about it too. Like, I know they like Tony Romo, near the end of his career, they were like, yeah, his back is dead, so he's on a pitch count. Like, wait, what? Is he only going to throw 30 passes? What if you're behind? What's happening?
Well, I bet. Well, no, never mind. I'm not gonna go that far into it. But so Teddy practices. Zimmer comes out and says, "Let's pump the brakes on Teddy. He's probably not going to be playing anytime soon."
Probably. That's a very open-ended. Probably, huh? Well,
because you never know. I mean, everybody was convinced that Aaron Rodgers was going to be MVP until he's not.
Right. But yeah, I know some people on Twitter are like, "Oh, probably, huh?" Which mostly they're joking. But I do want to put it out there. He's protecting himself because that time he said Terrence Newman didn't play safety, and then Matt Venzel was like, You put this whole thing up about not lying, and you lied, and like, I'm used to coaches lying to me and stuff like that, but I'm not used to coaches lying to me and saying I always tell the truth, I'm always straightforward. And Zimmer doesn't want that anymore, right? Because he apologized for saying Terrence Newman wasn't going to play safety when he did, and then now he's using probabilistic language to make sure, like, hey, maybe Teddy could play. Who knows? 1% chances, probably not, but it's still 1%.
I think he's tired of having his heart rate go up at every press conference when the media plays all this gotcha journalism when they tell him what he said and the reality turned out to be different.
Well, I've learned watching media analysis over the past year that that's just bad journalism.
So, hypothetical. Case Keenum goes out and doesn't get injured, but just is a potato. Because you wrote in Zone Coverage this week about how he's been looking pretty good this season, but that is very uncharacteristic for Keenum. And there is a decent chance that he will just like plummet back to earth. So
right, I think there's even a more than decent chance. I think it's unsustainable, and I kind of wish PFF had tweeted this out before I wrote the Keenum piece because it would have been perfect. Mm-hmm. But I mentioned in the piece that Diggs and Thielen are bailing him out really consistently, and I don't think that that's sustainable. Then PFF tweets out a thing. Diggs is first in the NFL in winning contested catches, and Thielen is like third. No way does that hold up. Like, I mean, I'm pretty sure the person who's second is not going to hold up either. Like, these things tend to be more dominated by outliers at week 6 than they are dominated by literally the best player at the thing.
Well, when you consider that Diggs didn't practice either, and, if doubtful were still designation, would probably be considered doubtful for this week's game. There's a decent to strong chance that Keenum goes full potato. And if he does, do we see Bradford? Do we see Teddy? Or do we just see Keenum twist in the wind?
I think this week we won't see Teddy. I don't think he'll be active because he's technically not on the roster right now. They would have to cut a quarterback. Yeah. And they could, just put him up like tomorrow. They could be like, yeah, you know what? We've seen enough. He's on the roster. And then you could start the questions, right? But I mean, until he's like on the roster, I would say Sluter is the guy This is the backup.
Ooh, now that I like that idea.
I know you do. You're fully tented.
And my Sluter enthusiasm is at 99%. Yours is not.
It's I'm hesitant. That's all.
But you would okay. Well, which would you rather have, Kyle Sluter or Potato Case Keenum?
Probably Potato Case Keenum. We have no evidence that Sluter knows what he's looking at.
well, when you put it that way, all right. But looking at the rest of the injury report, well, not injury report, but looking at what happened in practice, Diggs didn't practice, probably out. Do you think Anthony Barr will make it out of concussion protocol in time for the game?
I think so. I mean, this is like notoriously impossible to predict. And so like players who have like these like glancing blows that are concussions have been out for like 2 weeks, and players who take like this hit on hit and they fence and they're staggering on the field, they're back a week later. Which like a lot of people are like, oh, that's irresponsible. But I mean, that's just kind of how the brain works. Like sometimes you're back and sometimes you're not. But you know, it feels like it wasn't that big. I don't know. It just I don't have any argument. It feels like he'll be back.
And what's up with Michael Floyd? Is he ever going to be the downfield threat that we were all promised when we picked him up on suspension?
I mean, we'll have a good answer by like week 10. I think he'll come around to being the guy that we saw in training camp in the preseason.
But probably not this week.
But probably not this week.
So what we're really looking at, and I imagine you'll go into this on the interview, is the Thielen and Treadwell show.
Yeah, it seems like, and Jerry's right a little bit. I don't know. It's like weird to always characterize Jerry's Wright's usage role because he's been a deep slot, he's been a possession slot, he's been a bunch of different things. But I think we'll see him underneath more. So yeah, we'll see that. We'll see probably Kyle Rudolph is used a little bit more. I think most important is that McKinnon's going to feature in the passing game in a big way, which we alluded to in the interview with Dylan. He's worried about McKinnon based off of the last 2 weeks, just because he doesn't think that the Ravens defense matches up well with a feast or famine type running back like McKinnon.
What about Kyle Rudolph, tight end of the Schrodinger's athleticism?
I think he'll play a role. If he lines up against Tony Jefferson, that's going to be a really good matchup. If he lines up against CJ Mosley, that's not going to be as great of a matchup. But I think that'll be important, because I'm not confident in Treadwell, right? Like I'm not confident that, the very best of Treadwell that we saw in that kind of like highlight is the Treadwell that we're going to see, for the rest of the year, right? We just don't have enough evidence. We've got like this preponderance of evidence that, Treadwell has difficulty contributing, I guess is the best way to put it. And just a little bit of evidence that, he could be a pretty competent or able third receiver. Which it's good to see because it's, that evidence is more recent. You probably privilege it a little bit, but it's still, I don't think, enough yet for me to be confident. So I think we're going to see probably quite a bit of Kyle. It's just really, I think the matchup is going to dictate a lot of that.
So the over-under on freaky Randy Moss-style one-handed catches for Laquan Treadwell is still 1?
Yeah, right, exactly. It's just 1.
I will take the under on that, although I would love to see the over. And the Ravens may give him that opportunity. We've got Dylan Bishop on the line. You know him better than I do. I usually rely on their like Twitter and sports writer profiles to introduce the guests, but Dylan doesn't really.
His Twitter bio is something like, I have draft takes.
Which, as we've seen, may or may not be a useful thing. But I'll let you handle the introduction.
Yeah, Dylan Bishop is a guy who I followed for a while. Like he says, he has draft takes, and he's a big Ravens fan. I talked to him actually quite a bit about the Ravens, and he's the former, I guess I shouldn't say former. He's the co-founder of Playmaker Mentality, which no longer exists as a website, which is pretty unfortunate. But when he did do some work, it was pretty good work. So I asked him to drop some knowledge on the Ravens. It was pretty good.
Well, all right. Dylan Bishop at Villain Bishop on Twitter.
How's it going?
I'm good. So we brought you on to talk about the Ravens. You have been a Ravens fan for quite some time, but you've not been a huge fan of the quarterback Joe Flacco, who has admittedly not only underperformed this year, but seemingly has underperformed since signing that big contract. What's your take on him?
I have to agree with you. Honestly, I've never thought of him as much of anything other than an average quarterback at best. I don't think he's performed consistently over the course of his career. Really, the only time he's been consistent was the playoff run that led to the Super Bowl and his big contract. Other than that, he's gone between being average to just downright awful.
Why is that? Like, because before the Super Bowl run, I thought he was kind of like, maybe not the Mendoza line of quarterbacks, but he was like in average, like you said, an average quarterback, and he was maybe my example of like the most average quarterback. And then he goes on that big playoff run, spends all his energy or something, I guess, and then has played like much worse than average since then. Why would that be?
I think a big part of it is the lack of weapons on the offense. Right now, we're playing with Jeremy Maclin as the number one target, and he was hurt last week. So against the Bears, we were playing with Michael Campanaro, Mike Wallace, and Brashad Perriman as the targets on offense. And actually, against the Bears, he wasn't too bad. Both of his interceptions were dropped by the receivers and deflected up in the air and caught by the Bears. So I think even when he was playing averagely, it was because he had guys like Anquan Bolden and Dennis Pitta and Torrey Smith to throw to. But now his targets are a lot less talented.
Well, let's talk about those targets. So it feels like the Ravens have had like perpetual problems at tight end. I think they've had a running back go down to injury this year, right? Kenneth Dixon, yeah. Yeah, and that hurts a lot too. But they replaced Torrey Smith with Mike Wallace. Last year, Mike Wallace goes off. It was a 1,000-yard season. I almost have to eat a tweet, but I was saved from the person I made that bet with. But he feels like he's not doing much this year. It feels more like the Mike Wallace we've seen every year since Pittsburgh than the Mike Wallace we saw last year, at least statistically. I don't, get the chance to watch a ton of Ravens games. So why hasn't he been able to perform well? Is it because, he's used to being a secondary option? He needs another receiver opposite him. It was a fluke last year. What are your thoughts on that?
It seems more like a fluke. Like you said, he's kind of performed more like he has since he left Pittsburgh. I think a lot of it last year was maybe the offensive coordinator when they switched over to Marty Morningwig. They improved a little bit, but even this year, it's gone back to Morningwig not being very creative with the play calling. And I think it's gone back to just having an average at best quarterback and no one else around Wallace. Like when he's the best option on the field or the second best option on the field, it's not great for the offense.
And then it seems like there's the prototype across the field from him. Brashad Perriman is the same kind of prototype receiver. Is that a problem? I mean, like I know one of the problems with Brashad Perriman is that he's not particularly talented. But another has to be that it feels like you're not offering complementary receivers that you can run a variety of route concepts.
Yeah. I think with Maclin and Wallace and Perriman, they kind of have the same type of, they win the same way. So it's hard to really get anything going. We have Michael Campanaro, who's more of a slot guy who can run routes and move quickly, agilely in short areas. But yeah, Perriman, Wallace, and Maclin, they're all kind of the same type of guy, and it doesn't help that Perriman can't really catch the ball.
Yeah, that seems important. So what are they doing to complement those receivers? I mean, Ben Watson is a guy that people have been looking at. I mean, he's had like a really wild up and down roller coaster career, some really good seasons, some really bad seasons. And it feels like he's kind of in between the two this year. But is he just old now? Is it that, the offense isn't, doing enough to enable him? It seems like when you've got all these problems with your targets, that, typically an experienced tight end like Ben Watson, is somebody that you just kind of consistently rely on.
Yeah, they've been getting the ball to Wallace a little bit, but he hasn't really been too effective. I think he's on the back end of his career. Also, they get touches to Max Williams and Boyle, and a lot of times they'll keep the tight ends in to run block or pass block too. So it's the offense is just the passing offense is really just anemic at this point. No one's really producing that much, and I think it's a group effort. You know, Flacco's not that good, but neither the receivers, the tight ends, the running backs, the pass blocking on the offensive line. It's really
that offensive line used to be really good, especially when it had Marshall Yanda on it. For a while, it had Ben Grubbs. For that playoff run, I think it had Brian McKinney. But now it seems like Ronnie Stanley and maybe the center, whose name I don't even know. Maybe they're the only players. Jensen, right? Maybe they're the only players that seem to be holding the weight. Austin Howard, I think, is playing probably like the rest of his career, which is not too impressive. And then there's some problems at guard too. What's going on?
Actually, Austin Howard. He's been ranked pretty high on PFF and run blocking, and he seemed pretty impressive to me just watching the games.
Sure.
But the pass blocking it's really just Ronnie Stanley at this point who can pass block well, and Jensen. The guards, James Hurst and Illuminor, I think is his name. I think that's how you say it, who replaced Marshall Yanda. They haven't really been able to do well pass blocking or run blocking. But when it comes to running the ball, Stanley, Jensen, and Howard have been doing pretty well, and we've been able to get a little bit of a run game going.
Let's talk about those running backs for a little bit, just because Kenneth Dixon was like kind of everyone's fantasy waiver wire pickup last year. He was one of those draft sleepers that all of draft Twitter talks about. When he does well, everybody on draft Twitter loves him, and he seemed to be doing pretty well. But then you've got these replacement backs, and it feels like all of the replacement running backs are actually kind of in the same mold. Once one of them does well, I think most of draft Twitter is going to be like, yeah, well, I liked him. I was a big fan of Buck Allen. He just needed to be in the right offense or something like that. But they aren't playing that well, it seems like. If you can't get a passing game going, a lot of teams will probably lean on a running game. We're seeing that in Jacksonville, but it doesn't seem like that's a viable option to get the offense going either.
I think we have pretty much average talent at the running back position. I think Justice Mosqueda, with his update that they do on settingedge.com, had the Ravens offensive line as the 6th best right now, and the yards per carry plus stat he has ranks the Ravens as 12th. So about average when it comes to what the running backs can do past the line of scrimmage.
Right.
So
they have to get to the line of scrimmage in order to qualify for that kind of ranking, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think once they get past the line of scrimmage and the run blocking's pretty much done its work, they've been about average. But I think Alex Collins, who they picked up on waivers after he was cut by Seattle, has been doing really well, surprisingly well. I think he's somewhere around 7 yards per carry. I think his first 2 games with the Ravens, he had exactly 9 carries for 82 yards in both of the first 2 games. And he's been really impressive. He's really a downfield runner, really physical, and I've really been impressed by him.
Yeah, he was part of was it Arkansas, right? He's part of a 2-back system at Arkansas.
Yeah.
I think he was the one who was injured, right?
I believe so.
Yeah. I am just like I said. Everybody talks about how these underdrafted running backs are the ones that I liked. I liked him coming out of the draft, but I felt like he could only be a really good complementary back. It sounds like he's taking over a little bit. How much do you think of that is sustainable, and how much of that do you think is maybe a little bit fluky?
From what I've seen, it seems like it can be sustained as long as the offensive line keeps doing well. He can bust off these 5 yard, 6 yard per carry days and have his big runs like he did against Chicago for 30 yards and have his 9 yard per carry games against Pittsburgh and Jacksonville. I think what they would need is another guy like Danny Woodhead, who went down, to complement him, who can catch the ball out of the backfield and be a third down guy.
And that's not Buck Allen?
Buck Allen he's been pretty efficient in the pass game, but I don't see him as a really effective receiving back. He's been good, not great, I would say.
All right, no, fair enough. So, all that together, it's something Alex Collins is doing pretty well against, admittedly, some pretty good defenses. You mentioned Pittsburgh and Jacksonville. But it seems like overall, the Ravens offense is kind of more subject to how good the defense they're up against is and less how much offensive playmaking they can provide. And I find that kind of weird. Joe Flacco is, you hear Joe Flacco, you think of a deep passer, but he hasn't passed the ball deep very much this year. You mentioned Pro Football Focus. I took a look at deep attempt rate because I knew something was weird. And Joe Flacco is 30th of 32 quarterbacks in deep attempt rate. And I kind of want to know, is it the receivers that are forcing that to happen? Because it sounds like they've got, deep play receivers. Is it the offensive line? Is it the offensive coordinator? Is Joe Flacco genuinely attempting to change his playing style? Like it seems like, Alex Smith has tried this year. What's the reasoning behind a fewer deep attempts this year?
I think it's Marty Morningwig,
Okay.
the offensive coordinator. He hasn't really been taking shots down the field. It's been really just a bunch of play action rollouts to, the tight ends, fullback, and some intermediate passing. For the most part, I think it's just he hasn't been taking shots down the field. And obviously, I don't think Flacco's changed much. He will still take the shots down the field when he can, and miss them more than often.
Right, but it has to be in the play call, and that's just not appearing as often.
Yeah, I just don't think Morningwig is really taking the shots down the field.
Okay, and then you mentioned briefly Minnesota guy Max Williams, who in that class I thought was the top tight end, has not been panning out. It seems like, I remember there was this tweet from Greg Gabriel who was like, he didn't run faster than 4.6. He's going in the second round. I was angry. And that's the last I heard of him. He goes in the second round, and I don't know anything about him now. What's the deal? I mean, he was amazing at Minnesota.
He was. I agree. I don't know if I can't really put a finger on it. I'm not sure how often he's been injured, just off the top of my head. But
a Ravens tight end, so probably a reasonable amount.
That's a fair assumption. I just don't think he's been. I can't really explain it other than say he hasn't been playing well. Honestly,
Sure.
He hasn't panned out.
That's really disappointing. Well, so one of the things that the Vikings fans have been talking about in terms of this matchup is, or just in terms of overall, like how their defense performs. Trey Waynes gets targeted a lot. Xavier Rhodes has been, through games where he's only gotten one target, or 2 weeks ago he got 0 targets. Last week he got 0 targets until the fourth quarter and in garbage time. He's not getting targeted that often. Seems like he's playing well. Which I think is a pretty fair assumption. That defensive line is playing, I think, lights out. Everson Griffin is probably number 3 or 4, maybe number 2 in Defensive Player of the Year race behind maybe DeMarcus Lawrence or something like that. Danielle Hunter's playing well. Linval Joseph is, in my opinion, a top 3 nose tackle. Really, really good stuff from that defensive line. Which of those matchups concern you the most? And I didn't mention, of course, the linebackers or the safeties, which include Harrison Smith. But which of those matchups kind of concern you the most? Who do you expect Xavier Rhodes to follow if he follows anybody?
I wouldn't really expect Xavier Rhodes to have to follow anyone.
Sure. So kind of like Wallace, the Bears game then.
Yeah, I don't think Wallace or Perriman or even Macklin have been. Maybe if Macklin plays, perhaps, but I know he's hurt at the moment. But I don't think any of them have been effective enough to really warrant having Rhodes shadow them. And as for what a matchup I'm most concerned about, I'd probably say the defensive line against the offensive line. Because if they can shut down the Ravens' rushing attack, they should have no problem with the pass defense, especially if Flacco wants to target the number 1 corner as much as he did last week against Kyle Fuller, and things might not turn out so well.
So do you think that those offensive execution problems just generally do you think that there are turnover-worthy problems? Because you mentioned that like a couple of drops lead to interceptions and stuff like that, which that doesn't seem like a sustainable method of turnover production. Do you think that this is an offense that will end up resulting in more punts or more turnovers? Because it sounds like, I mean, you're not that confident in their ability to score points. So very often that means punting or turnovers. What do you think is kind of the flavor of this offense?
I think the conservative play calling, and if they run the ball as much as they have so far this year, it'll probably be more punts than turnovers. Hopefully we won't continue the ball hitting off the hand and deflecting up in the air trick that we tried against Chicago last week. But I think it'll lead to more punts than turnovers, but I could be wrong. Joe Flacco could have, if he has time to throw, sometimes he doesn't make the right decisions and bad things happen. But overall, I'd say punts.
Fair enough. So that'll put the Vikings in maybe a little bit of a worse field position when they're on offense. It'll be exciting to see kind of how that Vikings offense matches up against what to me isn't a defense that not many people are talking about. Kind of weird, given that the Ravens defense, historically people talk about the Ravens defense, the Steelers defense, so on. But it's kind of an unusual setup for defense. I mean, Suggs is still playing well. Jimmy Smith is maybe the corner no one's talking about. I took a look at. I created these adjusted yards allowed per snap and coverage, and Jimmy Smith is number 1 in the NFL. So it sounds like he's playing pretty well. Brandon Williams is practicing today. He's a really top-tier defensive tackle. Michael Pierce was replacing him, I think, and he's really good. I know at 4Verts, Charles McDonald, big fan of both of them. I would like to defer to him when it comes to defensive line analysis. And those are pretty good players. CJ Mosley was really, really good last year. PFF doesn't really like what he's done this year, but I suspect he probably get back up to normally good range. What are your feelings on the defense just in general?
I'm concerned about what they've done since Brandon Williams has gone out with an injury. Ever since then, they've been giving up a lot of rushing yards. Obviously against Le'Veon Bell and Jordan Howard, it's kind of excusable. But ever since he's gone down, they've replaced him with Willie Henry, who has been good, but it hasn't been the same. I was watching the Bears game earlier today, and I just saw that in the second half especially, the Bears were just running the ball right up the middle and getting more yards than they should against this Ravens defense. It's been a little strange to me that just losing Brandon Williams and replacing him with a guy like Willie Henry, who's played well, has resulted in so much more rushing yards than previously.
So do you expect, because I know Brandon Williams appeared as a participating member of practice. I don't know if he was limited or not. But do you expect Brandon Williams to play this week?
I would hope so. I'm not going to. I can't really say either way if I think he will or not, but I can only hope so.
All right, and then when it comes to sort of the Vikings offensive line, we see a lot more success on screens, on draws, on plays that allow the offensive linemen to move. They've been pretty good on pulling runs. But they've been pretty inconsistent when it comes to just running up the inside, which without Brandon Williams, it seems like, movable object meets resistible force. It seems like it's kind of who might flail first. But, just generally speaking, we've seen Jerick McKinnon play well. But, without Dalvin Cook, it really feels like the run game is more average. You have a run game now, and it's not something that you can kind of rely on. What are your thoughts on like your confidence level with or without Brandon Williams going up against a Vikings run game that has a pretty average but inconsistent offensive line, and it seems like pretty average but inconsistent running production?
Just over this year and last year, it's been hard for me to get a whole bunch of confidence in the Ravens in general, but the defense has been doing well. I'm not sure. I've seen that McKinnon has, at least had a bunch of yards the last 2 games, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it's been pretty explosive the last 2 games. Inconsistent, a lot of 1-yard runs and a lot of 10-yard runs.
Mm-hmm.
But 145, 200 some yards over the past 2 games, both in the air and on the ground.
Yeah. It's concerning, but with the explosive plays, I at least saw against the Bears that Eric Weddle gave up a big run because of a missed tackle. And just the Ravens in general, I'm not really confident that they can stop the run, but I'm pretty cynical. I'm not the most positive fan I want to say that they'll do a okay job, but part of me hopes they don't because of draft position. But so
You're already
maybe
at
go
that
Vikings.
spot?
I don't know. We're 3-3, but this seems like a team that could win 7 games, but really needs to win 4 to be able to get a guy at the top, near the top of the draft, who can, like a playmaker, like a top running back or a top wide receiver or something, to get this offense going.
You're a bit of a draft guy. Is there anyone that you've got your eye on that might help the Ravens out?
I can only dream for Saquon Barkley, but knowing that the Ravens will probably win at least 6 games, 7, and be in the teens, I'm looking at more of a guy like Ronald Jones, maybe Bryce Love, if he declares. I haven't looked much at wide receivers this year, but I've noticed Simi Cobbs Jr. from Indiana and Cortland Sutton, I believe is his name, from SMU.
Yeah, real good player.
Yeah,
he's been on, I think he's been on the radar
weapons
for like ever since he arrived at SMU. People have been talking about him.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned Eric Weddle really briefly. Maybe I thought after Reed and Polamalu retired, I thought he was the best safety in the NFL. Obviously, you can talk about Earl Thomas, Harrison Smith. You can talk about Eric Berry. But I thought Weddle was the best at that moment. Now, obviously, I, as a Vikings fan, think Harrison Smith is the best, but it seems like Weddle has fallen off. Do you feel like his career is nearly over, or do you think he's got a little bit left in him?
He played really well last year.
Yeah.
So a big jump, a big fall off for him would be weird for me. But I think from what little I've seen this year, he has fallen off a little bit. I'm not sure if that's just a team confidence issue. I think maybe John Harbaugh's message at this point has grown stale, his motivational techniques, and also Dean Pease hasn't been calling great games on defense. I want to say that Weddle maybe's fallen off a little bit, but I think he can pick it back up.
Sure. Do you think Dean Pease is, I remember a couple of years ago, he was kind of, people talked about him as a potential head coach candidate, especially after his first year as a defensive coordinator. And it feels like, that's no longer the case. Do you feel like he missed a window where he could have been, a prime head coaching candidate?
Yeah, he probably did. At this point, I don't see anyone looking at him as a head coach candidate. I think these defenses have been more predicated on the talent of the players more so than his play calling, especially this year.
All right, well, let's talk about maybe one of the more talented players, Jimmy Smith. I mentioned him a little bit ago, but we didn't talk about him much. If Stephon Diggs is healthy, then you've got both Diggs and Thielen out there. Is this a defense where you see receivers following, or you see cornerbacks following receivers? Do they stick to sides? They mix it up a lot, so you can't really tell what's going on. What do you expect Jimmy Smith to do if both of those receivers are healthy?
If they're both healthy, I wouldn't be surprised if they just stick to one side of the field. But if Diggs is out and Thielen is the only one in, I can see Jimmy Smith shadowing Thielen and Brandon Carr taking the number 2. But otherwise, if they're both in, I think they'll just let them stick to their side and see who comes over there.
How confident are you in a Jimmy Smith-Adam Thielen matchup? I mean, Adam Thielen's leading the league, or leading the NFC in receiving yards. Jimmy Smith has been quietly extremely good, at least statistically. And, that seems like sort of, I'm not saying Thielen's the best receiver in the NFL or anything like that, whereas Smith may be in an argument as a top 5 corner. But it seems like, strength against strength if that happens. How confident are you in that matchup?
I'd say it's one of the places I'm most confident with the Ravens. Jimmy Smith, like you said, you're not wrong. He's been really good. His problem has just been staying healthy, staying on the field. Mm-hmm. When he's on the field and healthy, he can shut down the majority of the wide receivers in the NFL. And I won't make any guarantees, but I think Jimmy Smith could handle Thielen as long as he stays on the field healthy.
Sure. Well, another player that has played well when healthy, but doesn't seem to be playing well anymore, Ladarius Webb. He's the slot corner, right? What's up with him?
Yeah, I think even then that Marlon Humphrey has gotten on the field some to replace him. I think injuries with him just kind of derailed his career. There was a point where he was playing really well and playing one of the top tier corners in the league. But I think at this point, age and injuries have caught up with him to where he can only be a safety like he was last year, or a slot corner this year, and play marginally well.
All right. Well, so one of the players that they'll probably end up going up against, especially Brandon Carr, might be Laquan Treadwell, especially if Stephon Diggs isn't healthy. Treadwell has been kind of a sore spot for Vikings fans, especially after last year, but it seems like he's kind of coming into his own this year. He's been getting a lot more snaps. Didn't get a ton of targets in the first 4 games. With Stephon Diggs out, he's gotten a couple of chances, and then there was this highlight catch. I don't know if you saw it last week with Laquan Treadwell. Okay, cool. What were your thoughts on Treadwell coming out? What do you think about him now based off of what little or a lot that you've seen of him? And what do you think about his potential matchup against, Webb, Humphrey, or Carr?
I really liked Treadwell coming out of college. I know a lot of people didn't have him wide receiver 1. I personally had Josh Dotson just slightly higher than him. I've actually been pretty pleasantly surprised by Brandon Carr this year. He's been at least solid to good when I've been watching the Ravens. But I haven't seen much of Treadwell other than this year. Like you said, he may be coming into his own. I'm not confident either way what could happen in that matchup, but Brandon Carr has been doing at least solid this whole season. So I am confident in him, at least, in playing well.
All right. Well, the only sort of other offensive weapon we haven't talked about is Kyle Rudolph, who I've gotten into a bit of a weird Twitter drama, not even with, just kind of involving him. But Dusty and I'll probably go into that in more detail during the rest of the show. But I'm just kind of wondering, what your thoughts on Rudolph are. I mean, he hit a career year last year, over 800 yards. He'll probably either be lining up against, from my understanding, Jefferson. I'm not sure though, and he may end up lining up against C.J. Mosley. First, who do you expect to take Rudolph in passing situations, and are you worried about a potential matchup there?
I wouldn't be surprised at all to see Tony Jefferson cover him or C.J. Mosley. I couldn't give a really confident prediction as to which one, but I know that either way, I think I'm at least a little bit confident that they can contain him and not give up a bunch of yards to him. C.J. Mosley has really impressed me with how he's covered. He's had a bunch of interceptions over the last few years, usually in zone coverage though, but I think he can handle Rudolph and man. Even I know Kyle Rudolph is pretty, at least decent.
Sure. And then, well, okay, so, throwing to all of them is Case Keenum, who has overperformed this year, but I'm always worried is just going to stop doing that. I thought he looked really suspect in the last game, got away with a lot against Green Bay. And, it's what happens. You got a backup quarterback in there. They've probably gotten way more out of them than even they expected, but still, it's kind of an interesting situation. Just generally speaking, you take a look at the Ravens defense, you take a look at Case Keenum. What are your thoughts?
Well, the Ravens have been doing well against the pass so far this year, and it's not been too surprising, but I wonder how much it will continue, considering they haven't really faced a very good quarterback this year. You could say they faced Ben Roethlisberger, but Big Ben hasn't been playing like a very good quarterback this year. Right. They've gone against Deshaun Kaiser, Blake Bortles, Andy Dalton, E.J. Manuel, and Mitchell Trubisky. And while they're ranked high in a bunch of categories for pass defense, NEA defense, and what have you, I'm not fully confident that it can continue. Obviously, the defense is very talented. The secondary, the front seven, the pass rush. There's a lot of talented players on the defense. But being the kind of negative person I am when it comes to the Ravens, I'm not fully confident that they can keep up the top 5 defense that they against the pass that they have so far this year, just because of the quarterbacks they have played and the fact that Keenum has been overperforming and that they have at least one weapon that can really tear up the Ravens.
All right. So then 2 final questions before we ask for a score prediction and let you go. I know you've got a place to be. The first question is if Stephon Diggs is injured and you've got Thielen on Smith, and it sounds like you're confident in that matchup, who worries you the most? Is it Case Keenum? Is it Jerick McKinnon? Is it still Adam Thielen? Is it Kyle Rudolph? What kind of offensive weapon are you most concerned about?
I'm probably most concerned with McKinnon just because of how the run defense has played since Brandon Williams has gone out. If he plays, then it could change, but I think that the explosive playability of McKinnon could cause some problems for the defense.
All right. So that's the first question. The second question then is Ray Lewis. What the hell? Was he praying? Was he kneeling? What's going on?
I don't try to understand what Ray Lewis does and why ever, or if he's guilty or innocent of certain things. I just try to not think too much about it.
All right. So you give us a score prediction. Just a note, we've only ever been right about score predictions one time. It was 3 weeks ago, but we've been doing this for 4 years. So don't feel too pressured to make like a correct score prediction.
I'm going to go Minnesota 20, Baltimore 17.
All right. I'll log my score prediction as 24-17. I'm a little bit more excited about that offense. We'll see. Thanks for coming on. Again, I know you've got a place to be. You do some great draft work. Follow Dylan at Villain Bishop. Spelled how it sounds, right?
Yeah, like the opposite of a hero.
Yeah.
That word.
Yeah, Villain Bishop. For some great draft takes and cynical Ravens takes. Anything you want to plug?
No, I'm good. Thanks for having me, guys.
Sweet. Thanks for being on.
So that was Dylan Bishop, formerly of Playmaker Mentality, and now just a guy with takes.
Yeah, just some dude.
Pretty good takes, though. That was a great interview, and I think confirmed a lot of kind of what we knew about the matchup situation coming into this
right.
week.
Yeah, it's I think we're gonna learn a lot about what the Vikings running offense can do, just based off of, if Brandon Williams is in there, that'll tell you that if they can run against him, that's probably a pretty good running game despite losing Dalvin Cook. And if Brandon Williams is not there and they don't do well, then you've got maybe some red flags to worry about.
And tight end takes aside, one thing that you have been saying for quite a while is that Jerick McKinnon is actually pretty good. And that has seemed to bear itself out over the last few weeks. And hopefully it remains true, given that he is going to be an increasingly large part of this offense until we get some key players back.
Right. Like imagine that like the first 4 games where he only had 10 carries are not a representative sample of his running ability. Like, holy crap, what a surprise. The 44 carries the 44 touches he had in the past 2 games are a better representative sample of who he is. Weird.
I'm frankly astonished. Where's the gourmet hot take spot?
Right. By the way, if you judged, so people were judging Jerick McKinnon after 10 carries in the first 4 games. If you judged Dalvin Cook by his first 10 carries in the NFL, he did average 2.9 yards a carry.
Fire him. It
Chill
stinks.
out.
It's over.
Cut him. Cut him off of IR. I don't care.
Send him packing with Bucky Hodges. You can scour Twitter for hot takes about them. So, should we take a look at the mailbag? We got some fun stuff in here.
Great.
Including I don't know if this is like deep state surveillance, but Flag Husband writes in, I thought I saw Arif at Modest once. Modest?
I think it's pronounced Modest.
Thought I saw
it's a
Arif.
brewery in the North Loop.
Oh, okay. It sounds like a hipster Etsy.
Yeah, I was about to say like Mod Club, right?
Exactly. So Flag Husband thought he saw Arif at Modest once about a month ago. Pretty sure it was him. Looks short. How tall are his parents?
Can you just ask how tall I was?
I know. What does this have to do with your parents? I mean, they're I've seen them. They're not, tall. They're not taller than me.
They're not particularly tall people. I'm taller than my mother, and I'm a pretty short person. And I'm about as tall as my father. which means he's a pretty short person. But I don't remember being at a brewery in the North Loop within the past couple of months, but maybe. Like, I mean, we did some brewery hopping for a friend's like engagement party, so I mean that might be it, but I don't know.
So how are the beers at Modus? I don't think Gleeman and the Geek has ever been there, so I don't really know anything about their beer, and that's who I rely on to learn about the Minneapolis brew pub scene.
My drinking habits for beer are find the darkest thing they have and have that. Double point if it's like a nitro.
Ooh.
And
we're gonna have fun in London.
Whatever they had was good.
It was
dark.
Good.
It was a nitro. It was good.
It hit all of its beer marks.
Right. I'm not like a super like I couldn't be like, well, it's got a couple of notes of licorice, and I'm just not as experienced to be able to say that. I will say that it was full-bodied, rich, and there were some chocolate notes.
Ooh.
I'll say that.
This may be getting too detailed, but what color was the head? Was it more brown or was it more white?
It was probably more brown. Remember, this is
a while ago.
The last time I went to Modus, I don't know if it was the time this guy saw me, or the prior only time I would have gone before that. So it was a while ago, but it was a little browner.
Excellent. So dark beer at Modus is good. This question's dumb. I don't know why I copied it. Next question. Nathan Adam. We already covered that. Nathan Adam writes in, which offensive lineman has outperformed your expectations thus far? My opinion is Elfline, but I could see Remmers.
I actually think Elfline has performed to my expectation. I kind of expected him to have some highlight moments and have some lowlight moments, not just because he's a rookie, but that's also kind of what showed up with some of his Ohio State stuff. So that's not surprising to me. Remmers has far outperformed my expectations, in part because those expectations were built on how he'd been doing in training camp in the preseason. If I was only evaluating him based off of how he played at right tackle for the Carolina Panthers, this is kind of who he is right now. And so he'd be meeting that, but based off of what I had seen earlier, this is a lot better. He's performing a little bit better, especially the past couple of weeks as a run blocker, and a lot better as a pass protector.
My own follow-up to this question, what about Riley Reif? Is he just playing to expectation? I mean, he was kind of anticipated to be the most talented addition before the season started, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I expected some pretty good things out of him, and I think that he's playing pretty well. So I think he may be the best performing offensive lineman right now. But I can't say he's played above my expectation. I expected that, and I expected this current level of play.
Nathan's other question: any similarities between Antoine Winfield and Trey Waynes besides the obvious tackling percentage? Winfield used to get beat regularly in coverage too, if I recall.
That is so no. I wrote this really long piece on Antoine Winfield not too long ago. It was published in the offseason, so it wasn't like it was super recent. But it was this offseason, and it was late in the offseason, and it was about how underrated Antoine Winfield is. Everyone acknowledges that he's a really good run defender, but it still underrates his run defense. He's the best run defending cornerback in the history of the NFL, period. I don't care about Mel Blount. I don't care about Rondé Barber. I don't care about any of that. It's Antoine Winfield. Second, he was not just above average as a coverage player. He was well above average. He was very good in coverage. It just so happened to be that his insane ability at stopping the run really kind of overtook his reputation, and a lot of people were like, well, he's not as good a coverage defender as he is a run defender, which which must mean he's kind of only average or not that good at coverage. No. He, on his coverage ability alone, was a near Pro Bowl quality player. When you add in that elite run defense, he was one of the best cornerbacks in the NFL for a period of time, and he just wasn't recognized as such, unfortunately. I wanted to get that out of the way.
Well, all right, that's strong words.
Trey Waynes, on the other hand, is doing really well in run defense. I don't think he's in the same arena as Antoine Winfield in run defense. And a lot of it doesn't have to do necessarily with Trey Waynes' talent as a run defender. A lot of it has to do with how important Trey Waynes is to the run defense of the Vikings in general. without Antoine Winfield, the run defense for the Vikings suffers. And it did suffer, even when you had the Williams Wall in there, and they had like the best run defense in the NFL in 2006. Even when you include sort of all of that stuff. But without Trey Waynes, the defense against the run is fine. It's fine. It dips a little bit, but it's fine. And I think a lot of that has to do with just kind of the ways that they approach and attack the running game. He's very good at not missing tackles, which is a lot different than kind of creating and seeking out opportunities to really impact the run game, which I'm not going to say he's bad at. He's pretty good at that too, but Winfield was kind of like a magician at that. So I think there are kind of just two completely different levels there. And then Trey Waynes as a coverage defender, like he is like out of like 107 players, he ranks 101st in yards given up per snap in coverage.
Ugh.
Like he's really bad in coverage. And some people are like, well, I mean, but they're targeting Xavier Rhodes a lot, which that's actually, I think, a fairly good criticism of a statistic like that doesn't tend to account for like teammate performance. Fine. But if you isolate to only his targets, if you take a look at yards per target given up, which again, I think targets are a product of talent. So if you're targeted, that probably means because the quarterback thinks you're open. But, maybe Xavier Rhodes is so good that it doesn't really matter. They just want to target the other guy. Fine. Just look at yards per target. He ranks 92nd out of 107 in yards per target. You take a look at adjusted yards per target. You take into account like the fact that he had a couple of interceptions, as well as a couple of touchdowns given up, and he's second in the league in first downs given up. So you adjust for first downs, touchdowns, and interceptions. He's 89th. You throw in back the penalty yards. He's 93rd. Like he's just not good in coverage. And to compare the two is like insulting to Winfield, honestly.
Is Antoine Winfield on Twitter? Should we let him know about this?
Let's never talk to a player on Twitter again.
Let's not. Rob Sale writes in, why do I feel apprehension at the looming bye week and the next two winnable games after last year's dumpster fire? I'll hang up and listen.
Because winnable games are poison for Vikings fans.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, we should win this. It's just the Bears at Soldier Field. Whatever.
Well, and that's the danger of winnable games is that you can win the games, but at what cost? And I think we talked a little bit about the potential. I mean, we were just talking about if Case Keenum just plays like a potato. We didn't even touch the specter of him being injured, knock on wood,
right.
or
right.
Other key players, because we're doing all right. We've still got some of the best players in the league, both on offense and defense, but they're kind of sprinkled pretty thin. There's not a whole lot of room between having the number 1 through number 5 guys at a given position and like guys near the bottom of the entire league at their position.
Right, exactly. It's kind of funny because you take a look at, given how well Mac Alexander is playing, given that Terrence Newman has improved his play in the couple of snaps that he's played recently, you take a look at cornerback depth and, that's pretty good. And it's kind of the same thing with wide receiver depth, except 2 receivers are already like injured and potentially, not playing. It depends on the injury report. And then you're like, they're actually kind of thin now. So they can become thin pretty fast. Especially because maybe Mac Alexander's like playing pretty well because he hasn't been exposed yet because they want to target Trey Waynes. Maybe he's actually not that good. And then Terrence Newman cannot play more than 20 snaps. So really there's a really like a surprising kind of fragility to the depth at cornerback too. So you kind of want to avoid that. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like as a Vikings fan, anytime something's going well, you just kind of, wait for the other shoe to drop.
I think that sense of apprehension is just permanent. Like, until things are just going as badly as they possibly can be and there's no more room for apprehension.
Yeah, that has its own kind of relaxing to it.
Yeah, like, cool. I can go watch something else. That's how
like,
the Wild
like
doing.
in 2010, it's like, the Metrodome collapsed. Well, can't get any worse than this. And mostly it didn't.
Mostly. Caleb Arndt and Kenneth Allen ask a couple of questions that I'm just going to combine into one because they're both kind of getting around the same thing. Caleb's question, when Dalvin Cook comes back next year, does the team pay McKinnon or keep Murray on his current deal? Who's the more complimentary back to Cook? And then Kenneth Allen writes in, are you still high on Murray? What percentage of the snaps would you like him to get?
So I would be fine keeping both of them. I think the biggest worry is that McKinnon will find work elsewhere, maybe for even higher pay and for a better workload, because obviously when Dalvin Cook was healthy, McKinnon didn't get that much run. Like I said, he only had 10 carries in the first 4 games. And so I wouldn't be surprised if he tried to find opportunity and a little bit more money elsewhere. So that I think is the bigger thing, because I think the Vikings want to keep him, but if someone else wants to pay him more money, they're going to let him. So that's the biggest worry. As for Murray, yeah, I think so. Like, okay, so he's averaging like 2 yards a carry over the past couple of games. Like, I get it. Like, it's very frustrating. It doesn't seem like he's playing well. But you take a look at his success rate. It's actually not that different from McKinnon's. And late in games he's like struggling, but late in games is kind of when it matters a lot less. Because when he's gotten those carries, the Vikings have the lead. If you adjust his yards per carry to the actual situations he's running the ball in, this is a statistic I talk about a lot: yards above expectation. On average, running backs in 1st and 10 get 4.31 yards per carry. If a running back gets 5 yards, that means they've earned 1.69 yards above expectation on that run. You add it all up, you divide it by the number of runs that they have, and you add 4.18, which is the average running back run this year, and you get their yards above expectation. And Murray has an above average yards above expectation. And when I tell people this, which I don't say very often because it's a difficult statistic to explain concisely, they get really surprised. And it's because he's running a lot in 3rd and 2, in 3rd and 1, in 4th and 1 situations, and he gets 2 yards, and that's great. That's all you needed. But it hurts his average a lot. He's getting a lot of successes in difficult running situations. Like at 2nd and 5, they expect you to run the ball a lot. He gets 10 yards, right? So especially early in games, he's playing pretty well, and he's generating pretty good success rate. Later in games, he seems to be flagging. I wouldn't be surprised if that was related to, a conditioning problem related to his injury. So yeah, whatever. Murray is not performing as well as people expected. I think he's playing fine. I would be fine keeping him. He's overpaid, and that's a thing. But Dalvin Cook is massively underpaid, so it kind of balances out.
So do you feel like the percentage of snaps he gets is kind of dependent on the leverage of the snaps in a given game? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, exactly. No, that's precisely it. On 1st and 10, I want McKinnon out there. On 3rd and 1, I want Murray out there. And we even saw a successful goal line run from McKinnon that was blocked poorly. Elflein forgot to peel off his guy, get to the second level, and so this linebacker did a free shot at McKinnon, and McKinnon just runs into him, runs him over a little bit, gets a touchdown. So, it's not as if it's the end of the world, but yeah, in depending on the down and distance, depending on the situation in game, if you're up by like 40 or whatever, give it to Murray. But yeah, it's the snap count is really dependent. Like ideally, he has 30 snaps because that means the Vikings are doing really well and they're in a lot of really favorable down and distance situations. But that's a result of what had happened that allowed Murray onto the field. I think in most games I would have a 2-to-1 split where I'd have for every 2 snaps that McKinnon's on the field, 1 snap for Murray.
All right. Kyle P. Slaby writes in, how many picks do the Vikings get versus Joe Flacco? And will it be greater than the number of interceptions that Case Keenum throws?
If I were to say like an over-under Keenum Flacco interception, it'd be like 0.5. Like I would think Flacco throws maybe 1 more interception than Keenum, but I'm not confident. So I'd set the over-under Flacco interceptions versus Keenum is minus 0.5. So that's, yeah. Flacco probably throws 1 more interception. So I think that's maybe 2-to-1, where Keenum throws 1 and Flacco throws 2. But it wouldn't surprise me if it was like they threw the same amount of interceptions.
So there isn't really a situation where Flacco throws 6 and Keenum throws 5? He's not going to go full Matt Stafford.
Probably is, honestly. Like, Keenum, the ball's hanging in the air for a long time. Jimmy Smith's a real good corner. He'll just pick it off. Terrell South is still playing well. Yeah, it could happen.
Will Pat Elflein be able to handle a hurt Brandon Williams?
Probably not. Brandon Williams is really good. Even hurt.
Oh.
When I say Linval Joseph is a top 3 nose tackle, Brandon Williams is one of the guys that's competing with him, I think, for that spot. He's really good.
Don from Ohio writes in, have any of you guys played Cuphead yet? And if so, your thoughts?
I haven't. My roommate, who's a game reviewer, has. And I've watched him play it. astounding, really good gameplay, phenomenal graphics to hit on the theme, which is like a 1940s cartoon style. It's just really good. Love it.
I am
But,
aware.
I haven't played it though.
I'm in the same boat. I am aware of the game. I have not personally played it, and unfortunately, it's not free to play. And I am on fun spending embargo until I get back from London. So
Me too.
Yeah,
Weird.
well, there you go. So I will be able to report back to you the first week of November because Cuphead looks friggin' awesome, and it's first on my list. It's the number one game in America. One of the few games that has a 10 out of 10 rating on Steam.
Oh wow! All right.
Yeah. Don follows. Is it appropriate to give a woman flowers on a first date?
If you're in the world of Cuphead and it's 1940, I mean, I don't think it's inappropriate, but I think it depends a lot on your age. But if I were to go on a date with someone and I brought flowers, it'd be weird for my age bracket.
Well, so I feel like no woman will ever say, and I personally, if I was, well, woman or man, I feel like no one who is ever on the receiving end of flowers would say it's inappropriate. But
right, it's not like inappropriate, but it's like,
well, so, and this may sound crass, but approaching dating strategically, if you bring flowers on a first date, what are you going to do for the second date? Like, you've already established a baseline gift level that is higher than the gift level that most people in long-term relationships maintain on a regular basis.
Which I don't think that speaks poorly of those people, by the way.
No, I just feel like it sets up unreasonable expectations and kind of paints you into a corner once you get to like dates. Well, okay, but
let's say Don from Ohio, he's about to go on a date and he's asking this question for genuine advice from us. Why are you doing that?
That's a better question.
if he's willing to commit to that level of expectation, I guess that's fine, right?
On a first date, though?
If he's like, no, I'm going to continue to do this.
Okay, so huge mitigating factor. How well do you know the person you're going on the first date with? Because if this is like a mostly blind date, then I'd say that that showing up with flowers is really taking a bigger risk than if you already know this person and
that's true. Yeah.
And you're taking it to the dating level. In which case, flowers are a great gesture, and a small bouquet can have a large emotional impact while also having a small financial impact. I mean, who doesn't love flowers? Like, so I'm a big fan. The grocery store down the street has, of course, a florist, and they like to do like discounts on their day-old flowers. And we have lots of like plants in our home. We've got like some refugees from our summer garden hanging out by the window. We've got some orchids, and it's nice to have cut flowers around. It spruces up the place a little bit. And if I'm ever walking home from the store and anybody sees me walking, they are either immediately jealous of whoever I'm getting the flowers for, or they're like, smart man, you got the right idea. You're bringing somebody flowers. And it's like, well, actually, these flowers are mostly for me. But but I don't tell them that.
Right.
And
you are correct, sir.
Yes, I am smart. Look at my flowers. They smell nice too. But yeah, nobody doesn't like flowers. I just depending on how well you know the person you're going on the date with, I think you might be setting yourself up with unreasonable gifting expectations for future dates.
What about this scenario? You are in high school and you're picking up someone for the date, and you bring the flowers more to impress the parents who are going to answer the door.
One flower.
That's what. Okay, I thought 1 or 2 flowers. Yeah.
Yep. One.
And not any of this rose shit, like a snapdragon or something.
Yeah, not a red rose. That's cliche. Bring weird. One pretty flower, like a lily, or whatever. If there's good neighborhood flowers, just bring a pocket knife.
Exactly.
Not from the yard of the person whom you're like that. You'll probably get busted immediately if you show up with one of their flowers. But even a neighbor's flower, I think, would be appropriate. A whole bouquet is a great deal of commitment, and like small gestures get blown so far out of proportion in high school relationships that I think minimalism is a better way to go.
Agreed.
Last question. How does Arif get away with pissing off NFL players, but other followers suffer the consequences?
Hilarious. I have no idea. I wish I could tell you the answer.
I don't know. Maybe it's because Arif followed the rule, don't at players.
Yeah, right.
Maybe this is why the rule exists.
I genuinely think that he was like trying to figure out how to mute the conversation.
having entered, he realized he could not escape. Well, that is going to do it for episode 204 of Norse Code. We'll be back with James and a recap episode before the preview a week from today. And thanks to Dylan Bishop at Villain Bishop on Twitter for illuminating the horribleness of Joe Flacco and by extension the Ravens. Do you have anything you want to plug? I know I mentioned the story you wrote on Zone Coverage about Case Keenum, and I don't know, maybe I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you feel like including the thing you wrote about Antoine Winfield, that might be a good one for the show notes. Is there anything else you'd like to
I'll
plug?
put the Antoine Winfield one in the show notes too. I'm writing a piece, as it so happens, on Jerick McKinnon right now. I wrote another piece on Harrison Smith. Check all of those out.
And one final note. James, for reasons that are not relevant to the show, is interviewing Ryan Leaf today on the college campus where he works. And just minutes ago, he posted in our ongoing hangout, in case you were curious, Ryan Leaf smells amazing. Like, surprisingly good.
The more you know.
Demand excellence. Demand Norse Code. We will see you early next week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, or wherever else fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, who can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. Our intrepid producer and occasional co-host James Pagachnik can be found on Twitter at Big Mono or curating the official Norse Code Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN. I'm your host with a firm grasp of the obvious, Dusty O'Connell, and my name is my handle on Twitter. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, your one-time donation can be made at paypal.me/NorseCode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. Please visit our website, NorseCodePodcast.com, where you'll find links to our Facebook and YouTube pages, along with the episode archive and some other good stuff. And any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can be emailed to NorseCodePodcast@gmail.com. And on behalf of the entire Norse Code staff, thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.